Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Ariel Leek, and I'm the Student Vice President of UNCW Ratio Christi. Does God exist? Is the Bible reliable? What is truth? These are the types of questions that we like to consider at Ratio Christi, because we believe it is extremely important to know what you believe and why you believe it. Our motto is ask good questions, seek good answers, because we believe that if Christianity is true, then it will have the answer to any question. But we invite you to join us regardless of what your beliefs are, and join our discussions. So we meet Monday nights at 7 in Fisher University Union, room Azalea A. So tonight we're joined by guest apologist Mike Sherrard. He has a BA in religion and a Master's of Divinity with a concentration in apologetics from Luther Rice College and Seminary. And he's finishing a doctorate in ethics from Midwestern University. He has a passion for equipping the church, and especially the next generation, for making the case for Christianity, and travels throughout the US and Europe, speaking at camps, conferences, and churches. He is also the lead pastor for Crosspoint Community Church in Peachtree City, Georgia, and a faculty member at Summit Ministries. He's also, among other accomplishments, the author of Relational Apologetics, Defending the Christian Faith with Holiness, Respect, and Truth, and is currently under contract with Baker Publishing, working on a book, UMAP, How the World's Quest for Meaning is Meaningless Without God. So with that, please welcome Mike Sherrard.
Well, thank you for that, and it is a great joy to be here with some friends and hopefully to make some new ones here tonight. I got a question for you. How many of you like being wrong? What is wrong with you? Yeah. All right, we got help for you. There's a couple things. Either you're just lying because you just think this is funny, or you really like being wrong, and if that's the case, you need some serious help. We've either got someone you can confess to after this or get some psychological counseling. No, nobody likes being wrong. I've yet to meet the person that, in all seriousness, wakes up in the morning with the eager expectation to be shown how and why they're wrong. Nobody likes it. In fact, we go to great lengths, don't we, to avoid being shown to be wrong. Those of you that are married, you can testify to that, right? Your arguments, I'm sure you get into them. Me and my wife, we're professional arguers. And very rarely do our arguments go like this. Honey, would you please show me where I'm wrong? No, it's you did this, how could you? And that's just pretty common. I think most people, we go to great lengths to avoid being wrong, being shown to be wrong, or even admitting that we're wrong. Have you ever done that just in an argument about whatever it is? It could be something as trivial as college football, which in the South, I know you shouldn't say that is trivial. But you've ever had that experience when you're in an argument and you know you're wrong, but you just won't admit it? And you'll go again to great lengths to change the subject, maybe do a personal attack, draw out some random statistic that you're going to misuse, just so that you don't have to be shown to be wrong. I think we go to great lengths to do that. It's pretty common for us all. Here's another question for you. How many of you consider yourself to be an open-minded, tolerant person? This room is filled with a bunch of closed-minded bigots, apparently. I get it. You don't like raising your hands. In fact, I have some friends, and it doesn't matter what the speaker asks of them, they won't do it. If a speaker says stand up, they won't stand up. If they say raise hand, they won't do it. So anyways, I know we just don't like to raise our hands. I doubt it. I bet most of you consider yourself to be open-minded, a tolerant person. I think that's pretty common for most people. But let me ask you this. Think about your political opponents. I'm sure there are Republicans and Democrats in here. Take a social issue. I'm sure there are pro-life people in here and pro-choice people in here. Think about your opponents, if you will. Do you think they're open-minded? That's what I suspect. No, that's what we don't think. So here's we've got a problem here. Let me just summarize kind of what I think this group would agree, kind of what we have admitted, if you will. We don't like being wrong. We admit we go to great lengths to avoid being wrong or admitting that we're wrong. But we all believe we are open-minded, and so are the people that think just like us, but not people that don't think like us. There's a problem there, isn't there? Something doesn't add up. So you think you're open-minded. Are you? That's what we want to explore tonight. In tonight's lecture, we're going to discuss the nature of being open-minded. That is, what does it mean to be open-minded? We're going to discuss the value of being open-minded, how you can tell if you are open-minded, and also what justifies the belief and the value of being open-minded. We're going to look at, here's what I mean. Being open-minded, or holding to the value of being open-minded, it presupposes something important. So we want to be honest tonight with ourselves the best that we can and consider if we're the real thing, if we really are open-minded, or are we simply a copycat? We've learned the part, how to talk the talk, look the part, if you will. I think most people struggle with admitting that they're not open-minded. It's a real challenge. But there is advantages to having the courage to entertain the idea that you're wrong about something, and perhaps even that you're closed-minded. The ability to change your mind is an essential skill. It's an essential quality, if you will. It's needed for society such that we are able to be free and to flourish. There's one big challenge facing us, though, tonight, and it's this. Closed-minded people typically won't consider that they're actually closed-minded, because if they were, they'd be open-minded. And this is one of the great challenges, and it's why it's so dangerous, is that what I'll argue is that most people are closed-minded to some degree, yet they perceive that they are open-minded, and that is disastrous. And we need to figure out a way forward in light of this. Our country is ripping itself apart. It's very divided. It's perhaps as divided as it's ever been, though it's easy to take your time in history and think it's worse than others. But our country is filled with hatred, it seems. Political ideologies, religious beliefs, and the people on either side seem to just have deep hatred for those that don't think like them. You know, the national discourse is comprised of two sides seeking to shame the other, shut them up, and just silence them at whatever it costs. We've tuned out the other side. We've prejudged them without really getting to understand their arguments. We attack via ad hominem, and we reduce people that don't agree with us to evil idiots. Is it really that simple? I mean, on one hand, it might be nice to simply live in a world where you could believe that if someone disagrees with you, it's because they're an idiot and evil. But is it really the case? Is it really that simple? I don't think that it is. And we as a people need to figure out a way forward, unless we're just sadistic and want to watch the whole thing burn. So I think that being open-minded is an essential part of a free society, and it is needed for progress. And what I want us to do tonight, again, is to understand the nature of being open-minded, its value, its character, if you will, and its justification. So let's begin. And first, let's look at the nature of being open-minded. What does it mean to be open-minded? Simply put, I think it is the willingness to hear, consider, if you will, a belief different from the one you already possess. But that's simply the essence of being open-minded. It's a predisposition to hear, consider a viewpoint or an idea that is different from the one you already possess. It's unprejudiced, if you will. You have the ability not to prejudge an idea before you've examined it well. And most of us have challenges with being prejudiced. Hopefully that prejudice doesn't exist in things like racial discrimination and prejudice towards people and the devaluing of them because of some arbitrary characteristic they possess. But I think most of us struggle with prejudging something, wrongly assuming we understand something that we don't. We just tune our mind out. And so that's kind of closed-minded. You just assume you've got things figured out and you don't need to explore them any further. So open-mindedness is a disposition. It contains the willingness to consider a belief different than the one you already possess. It comes from a place of humility, one where you recognize that you don't know everything. Which again, most people would probably say that to be true, right? You just ask somebody, so you think you know everything? And their response is going to be no. But often we don't live that out. Our actions betray what we would say about ourselves, and though we would admit, yeah, I don't know everything, we don't act like that. And often we reduce a complex world to something that is way too simple. Life is not simple. Decisions are not simple. The world is morally complicated. But far too often we want to reduce it to something simple, close our mind, and just live in a land of assumptions. At the heart of being open-minded is intellectual honesty. And again, humility. I really appreciate the work of N.T. Wright, and if you're a theologian or New Testament scholar, you may have some issues with N.T. Wright, but you likely have issues with anybody that you study or learn from. But N.T. Wright's brilliant. He's done a lot of really good work. His research is pretty good. His argumentation is pretty sound. And in the beginning of one of his really good books, The New Testament and the People of God, he writes that I'm going to tell you, the reader, what I tell my students every semester. A good portion of what you read may be wrong or misguided. The only problem is I don't know which portion, otherwise I would change my mind. I really have grown to appreciate that kind of intellectual honesty and humility, where you're able to balance a conviction. I mean, heck, he wrote a book. He must have some conviction that what he is writing is true and backed by good reasoning. But yet there's a level of intellectual honesty and humility that probably looks back upon a career which involves mistakes and being wrong. And it's simply the recognition that I do not know everything, so I need to be open to the possibility that the beliefs that I hold right now, even if I hold them very strongly, it is at least possible that I'm wrong or misguided, that there's something that I'm not seeing. And so I think that's the essence of being open-minded. It's simply a predisposition to consider a belief that you don't already possess. So should you be open-minded about everything then? Yes, but being open-minded isn't the same thing as being skeptical about everything or blindly accepting everything. Again, open-mindedness is a willingness to consider, not a predisposition to religiously doubt or blindly accept everything. In other words, being open-minded doesn't mean that you can't ever come to firm conclusions. That's an untenable way to live. You can't doubt everything. A life of skepticism is not you can't consistently live that out. Many people have pointed this out. I love the writings of C.S. Lewis. He is one that pointed this out very well. He wrote in The Abolition of Man, if you don't mind me reading it, he said, "You cannot go on seeing through things forever. The whole point of seeing through something is to see something through it. It is good that the window should be transparent because the street or garden beyond it is opaque. How if you saw through the garden too? It's no use trying to see through first principles. If you see through everything, then everything is transparent. But a wholly transparent world is an invisible world. To see through all things is the same as not to see." It's a brilliant insight. And so to be open-minded doesn't mean that you can never come to a firm conclusion and you must doubt everything. Because if you doubted everything, if you were skeptical about everything, you'd have to be skeptical of your skepticism. And it's the same thing as not seeing anything ever. And nobody ever lives that way anyways. It's an untenable way to live. Now, there are some things that you can come to believe to be true, and you should, based upon good reasoning, good argumentation, and even your own experience. Your experience can be reliable, though it is not the highest tier of truth detecting. But there are some axiomatic, self-evident truths that actually require no argument to accept, and to reject would be detrimental to possessing any knowledge. First principles in logic, for example, are in that category. A first principle is simply a basic assumption that cannot be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. Things like, I know Ratio Christi has probably studied, things like the law of non-contradiction, which Aristotle says is the firmest of the first principles, and that without the principle of non-contradiction, you could not know anything about anything. And if you're not familiar with what the law of non-contradiction is, it's simply that A cannot be both A and non-A in the same way at the exact same time and in the same sense. For example, the statement the earth is round and the earth is flat, both can't be true at the same time and in the same way. That's what the law of non-contradiction is. It's a first principle, and first principles are the building blocks of knowledge, and to reject them is detrimental to possessing any knowledge. So the point of all this is simply that when it comes to being open-minded, what I want to establish is that it is this disposition of willingness to hear, consider an idea that you don't already possess. The willingness to hear out somebody else and consider if you were wrong or misguided. It doesn't lead to a life of skepticism, and it doesn't lead to a life where you just have to accept every belief that is out there. So if you were to come to firm conclusions, that does not mean that you are closed-minded. No, you still can be an open-minded person that listens to good reasoning, considers good argumentation, and then based upon the best evidence possible, come to a conclusion that you hold pretty tightly. Yet you are still willing to entertain an idea that goes against the one that you already possess. So what about the value of being open-minded? First, let's consider if there is a danger in being open-minded. Should all viewpoints, in other words, be heard? Is there a danger there? Are there some ideas that are so vile, so harmful, that we ought not listen to them and actively seek to shut them down? There's a growing belief that that's the case. Free speech on college campuses reflect, I think, such a belief. There is a fear that people will be persuaded by harmful teaching, and if you give harmful teaching a platform, you legitimize it. And perhaps then that leads to the legitimization of it, leads to the people believing it. So instead of that, just shut it down and limit free speech. Problem with that is it's a shaming tactic, and they often don't work. It's not engaging the argument to show that it is bad. It's to shame you into feeling bad for even considering it. And it often doesn't work. It typically backfires. So without even getting into maybe a deeper discussion on that, practically speaking, it doesn't work. The appropriate response to bad ideas and bad philosophy are good ideas, good philosophy, good argumentation. The solution isn't a muzzle. In fact, a sure sign that a position is weak is when opposing viewpoints are silenced instead of rebutted. You know who's been really bad in the last several years about this, though I think there is some change. And by bad, what I mean is the silencing of an opposing viewpoint. You know who's been pretty bad about this, at least in my lifetime? The church. as I've gotten into apologetics, if you will, or speaking nationally, I come across a lot of young adults. And when I first got into the game, if you will, I expected to meet atheists that would say things like, yeah, I don't believe in God because of evil. How could God be good and all-powerful if evil exists? I was expecting a problem of pain argument. I was expecting a reason like you just can't trust the Bible and that's why I don't believe in God. And I was expecting some of these other arguments. Well, I started to get one reason very often. And typically everywhere I go, I'll have someone say, yeah, this is my story. And I'll always ask a question of a group and an audience or just meeting you like I did before. And, do you believe in God? Why or why not? If I come to find out someone's an atheist, I always ask the question, so why? What's the biggest objection you have to belief in God? You know what I started getting all the time? Nobody ever let me ask a question in my church. Just recently, I had a colleague of mine telling me about an old college friend who reached back out to him, tried to connect. But the story goes of this person. He was an atheist, grew up in the church, left the church, and we've certainly witnessed a bit of an exodus from the church among the younger generations. And his story was like so many that I've heard. He tells the story about how around in middle school, he just asked a question concerning, could all of the animals really fit on the ark? It's a great, simple question. You should ask that question if you're in 6th grade. You should ask that question if you're old. There's no age limit, but you should start asking that question. And you know what he was told? Christians don't ask questions. They just have faith. It's a bit of a shaming tactic even in the church, where this blind faith became a virtue and a symbol of authentic Christianity. That's not what faith is. That's not the nature of faith. Moreover, when a young adult, a young man, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever, asks a real question and they're told if you had answers, you wouldn't need faith, what does that communicate to that young adult? There are no answers. This is nothing but smoke and mirrors. There's no substance to our religion. We just believe and wishfully hope that God exists, but don't ask any questions. It's the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. We don't want you to see what's there. What's interesting to me, though, is over the last 5 years, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that I've seen either a reverse of this exodus or an exodus of a new kind. But in my church, I am regularly having atheists come to our gatherings, whether it's a Sunday morning or a special event, for the exact same reason that Christians were leaving the church over the last 20 years. On their secular campuses, they're not being allowed to ask a question if it goes against the status quo. It's being shut down. And when questions, legitimate questions, are shut down, and when viewpoints are eliminated, it conveys there's nothing to it. Because if there was, you could engage on the level of arguments. You could engage in the world of ideas. And if you can't, if you have to resort to shame tactics and simply silencing, it must be because you know your position's weak. Strong positions are not afraid of questions. They welcome them. And it's ironic, I guess, I always use the word ironic wrongly. But what I saw happening in the church, I'm now starting to see in secularism. And people are coming to my church and other churches and saying this to me: I have nowhere else to go where I can engage in discourse like this. I've even had people say this to me after a sermon on abortion. I had a man not too long ago come to my church. He's from a different country, and he was in town visiting an old college friend, and this friend just invited them to church, which is such a good thing. If you're a Christian, just invite people to church. We think that that's stupid for some reason. I don't know, but they invited this person to church, and they get here, and I know I'm going to speak on abortion. Many of you have heard Mike Adams give a talk on abortion, and I come from the same school, the Klusendorf tree, if you will, and argue for the pro-life case very similar to that. But this is a Sunday morning, and they're coming, and my friend says, hey, my friend is here. They're an atheist. We always used to get into arguments, and he literally said he would never step in church again, and he's here. Don't screw this up. It's like, crap. What do I do? Do I call an audible, pull a sermon out of your back pocket kind of thing? And I was like, no, I'm going to still do it. And so I preached the message that involved, of course, the gospel, and used science and philosophy to make a case for the pro-life position. And afterwards, this guy's making a beeline towards me. But I can tell from his face this is going to be a good conversation. I'll never forget what this guy said. He said, Mike, and if I had a good Spanish accent, I would do it, but I'll just offend people by trying to do one. He said, Mike, I had a culture shock experience this morning. He said, you see, where I come from, nobody talks about abortion. And when they do, they certainly don't do it like this. He said, and here I was hearing these are his words, a reasonable, thought-provoking, non-judgmental message that used science and philosophy, and I could not believe that this was coming out of the mouth of a Christian. He said, it'll never be the same. And my point is simply this, that silencing viewpoints doesn't work. It conveys to somebody that your position is really weak. These tactics they're shame tactics, and I think they're driven by a position of fear and arrogance, and especially, the word offended gets thrown around way too much, but when a university will shut down free speech because they think the speech too dangerous and harmful, what message does that send? Well, the message they're trying to send is this is a vile message, don't even consider it. But the other message they send is that you're too dumb to decide that. Like, oh, these little kids, we got to protect them because they're too stupid. They're going to be deceived by this. What? No. You're smart, intelligent individuals capable of rational thinking. You don't need to be put in a bunker, wrapped in bubble. Whatever that bubble stuff is called. I can't remember what it's called. Bubble tape? Not bubble. Whatever it is. You get the point. Bubble wrap. Bubble wrap. I said it right. There you go. You can hear ideas contrary, potentially even harmful, because you have the ability to judge them and weigh them for yourself. So I don't think that there's a need to silence even what you consider to be a vile or evil viewpoint. Being open-minded and being willing to consider beliefs that you don't already possess, it's so valuable. It's a virtue that a healthy society needs. For at the core of being open-minded is humility and respect. And a healthy society is filled with humble people that are respectful. It's also a requirement for a truly free society. Closed-minded people have no need for arguments. All they need is power. If you're not willing to listen to an opposing viewpoint because you've already closed your mind off to the possibility that you could be wrong, you don't need to listen to people. You just need to shut them up. You just need to control them. So for a society to be truly free, people need to embrace the value and the virtue of being open-minded in order, again, for it to remain free. Being open-minded is also necessary for progress. Think about where the civil rights movement would be if the majority succeeded in silencing the minority. Where would gender equality be? An interesting example on this, which my statement may be misleading. It's not going exactly where you thought it would go, at least fully. So really interesting movement in neuroscience that is taking place over the last 20 years. See, there was political pressure on the neuroscientific community not to study sex differences in the brain. And we understand part of the reasoning. There's really 4 reasons. The last one is relevant to our talk here. There was political pressure because there was a fear based on a false assumption that if science established that there were differences in men and women's brains, it would simply establish inequality, like scientifically. But it was a false assumption that differences do not equal inequality. The neuroscientific community eventually rebelled against this pressure, and you should research it for yourself. Larry Cahill, for example, prominent neuroscientist, he edited a volume in the Journal of Neuroscience, not religiously, politically affiliated, just a scientific journal. Pretty important one. It's over 70 articles. This just came out in 2017, by the way. And it was titled, "An Issue Whose Time Has Come, How Sex Influences the Nervous System." And in the introduction to this, Cahill talks about the pressure he experienced early in his career. He said the advice he was given was, don't go there. Don't let your research take you into examining differences in men and women's brain. He said the advice he was given was, it's the third rail. Unless you want to become a pariah or worse in this community, don't go there. But the reason the neuroscientific community, amongst others, this also happened in psychology too, the reason they broke out of this was they realized how this actually leads to inequality. For example, some of the things that they have come to find is that the biological mechanisms that allow men and women to process stress are different. It's just different biologically. Women also suffer from stress-induced anxiety disorders like PTSD twice as much as men. But for 100 years, clinical practices and drugs were developed on the assumption that whatever works for men will work for women. You see where the harm to women comes in this? And it's actually ironic. In the name of equality, what was created was an inequitable healthcare system that's better equipped to treat men in some respects. And we could go on more and more about this. This is an interesting topic to me. But this is where progress, why we need to be open-minded so that progress continues. And I lament, and we all should lament, the lack of progress that has happened in neuroscience because of the political pressure that forbade them from doing this kind of research. This is not the world we want to live in. So I think, maybe I'm wrong to assume this, but I think there's probably a general agreement in here. Being open-minded is good. It's good for society. And many of us probably struggle with being open-minded, that we're all probably closed-minded more than we would like. So how can we tell if we're open-minded? Let me give you 4 kind of signposts, if you will. The first is that open-minded people listen. And I'll say that again for those of you that weren't. No, it was a dumb joke. It was really, thank you for laughing. Maybe you're just laughing how bad it was. Now, what do most people do? Think about the most recent argument you were in when someone was challenging your beliefs. What were you doing while they were arguing? You're probably thinking about what to say next, weren't you? That's what everybody does. Is that a good way to have a conversation? Is that actually a conversation? No. You know what that is? That's 2 people lecturing to an audience that isn't paying attention. It's a terrible way to advance your ideas. Truly open-minded people have the ability to listen. And it's a skill that you have to develop. For whatever reason, it doesn't come naturally. But closed-minded people, they don't listen, and it's partly because they don't like challenging ideas. They want to just show you where you're wrong without understanding where you're coming from. They get angry when you ask them to explain something, and the anger likely stems from the frustration that questions are just slowing us down, and you're an idiot because you don't agree. And you probably are thinking about someone like that right now, aren't you? Well, stop it. It's you. You do it too. We all do this. This is symptomatic of all people seemingly in our culture. But open-minded people have the ability to listen. They're not afraid of a challenging idea. They're not solely concerned with showing you why you're wrong without understanding where you're coming from. They don't get angry, especially they don't get angry when asked to explain something. They view it as an opportunity to argue for what is true. And they have the confidence that their position is the right one, and so they welcome the explanation. And that's really something for you to think about. I want you to really think about this. How often you get angry in your conversations about controversial subjects. And I want you to think about your anger. Why do you get angry? There's probably a number of reasons, but here's one of the main ones. That anger arises out of the frustration of the inability for you to prove your point, which probably stems from a lack of understanding on your own part. You're convinced that it's true, but you don't know why it's true. And you get frustrated. Your anger is likely a sign to you that your position isn't as strong as you think. Or it could be that your position is incredibly strong, you just don't know it. My point is, when you find yourself getting angry in these conversations, that should be a moment of self-reflection that signals to you, I need to go study my position and see if it is the correct one. Open-minded people, along with listening, they ask questions. They inquire. Closed-minded people make statements more than they will ask questions. Again, they are thinking about only how to refute somebody rather than trying to understand what they're missing. And as I work through these, I'm assuming that you can maintain a healthy balance that you should try to refute people. Absolutely. Part of what I do for a living is refuting ideas. So it's not mutually exclusive. It's neither you refute ideas or you're open-minded. Now, you can refute ideas, but in the process of refuting ideas, you still need to have the intellectual humility that allows you to consider what you're missing. That's one of the things that I wish more people maybe even knew about myself, because I get called a lot of things. I wish people knew how much I obsess over the fact that I could be wrong about something. I'm always examining my ideas, my beliefs, my convictions, my life with this, what am I missing here? Because I don't know everything. I know that. And of the beliefs that I have and the strong convictions that I have, even there, what am I missing that would either strengthen my belief or cause me to reconsider a portion of it? So open-minded people, they ask questions. They entertain the idea that they could be wrong. Here's another telltale sign. You ever hear somebody say, I'm not a racist, but? That's a sure sign you're a racist. There should not be a conjunction there, period. I'm not a racist, period. And then if you have something to say, but go ahead. How many times have you heard people say this? I could be wrong, but. What probably follows isn't a question, but an assertion as to why they're not wrong. But if you're going to utter the phrase, I could be wrong, you probably should put a period there and then ask a question. If you really think you might be wrong, let's find out if you are. Let's not use it just as this faux humility to transition into another assertion or statement. The third sign of being open-minded is that you're able to suspend judgment. Closed-minded people have trouble holding two thoughts simultaneously in their mind. I'm not mocking by that statement. Again, it kind of just stems from this desire, maybe it's a fear, I don't know, where we just need to reduce life to it being simple. But life is not simple. And open-minded people are able to entertain that these two ideas that I don't know how they could exist together somehow might exist together. Like, one of the attacks that I get quite frequently for some of my views are, why can't you just love people? Well, wait a minute. Why is it, do you not think these two things can be true? That I can love people and think this at the same time, even though it's not what you think? Is that not possible? But again, most of us have the difficulty of being able to entertain two ideas that we don't see how they fit together, so we just kick one out because we have to make the world more simple than it is. And they're too quick to make judgments. They just rush to make judgments. I'm obviously a Christian. You know that I'm a pastor. I think the teachings of Jesus, not only are they true, they're just brilliant. He was a great teacher. One of Jesus's best, or I don't know, best is probably the wrong choice of words. His teaching on judging is amazing and misunderstood. Perhaps the most misquoted Bible verse is, "Do not judge." And you've probably, if you're a Christian, you've probably had that thrown in your face like, Jesus said don't judge, why are you judging? That's not the point of Jesus' statement, because even to say do not judge is a judgment. The teaching of Jesus is more about how difficult it is to make a good judgment. And his specific point of contention there was with the hypocritical Pharisees that had just a plank full of sin in their life, but they thought they could spot the speck in someone else's. And Jesus said, you're a hypocrite. Remove the log from your own eye, then you'll be able to help your brother. And so really Jesus' teaching on that is how to be a good judge. But with it comes the recognition of it's very hard to be a good judge. There's always something out there that you don't know. And the older that I've gotten, and the more of life that I've experienced, I realize how complicated it is. Again, this does not lead to a life of skepticism or I just accept everything. No, I have very firm convictions. But this knowledge, what it should produce in us, is simply humility. And developing practices of suspending judgment. So you're not the first one to comment. One of the most sickening things about media today, and it's bad reporting, is who can be the first to put the spin on what just happened? Rather than really figure out what happened. And media, it's become a teacher in many respects. And that's filtered down into the rest of society where we just make a decision. Without really understanding it, without really gathering facts. And how can we make what happened fit what I already believe and then use it, weaponize it to attack my opponents? Do you really want to live in that world? Then stop contributing by your own practices. We all do it. This isn't a partisan issue. We all are really bad at this. So learn to suspend judgment. And the fourth sign, which I've already said several times, I guess, is simply that you are humble. How do you know that you're humble? I guess that's a good question. Have you admitted when you've changed your mind? That's a good question. Because a lot of us will change our mind, but we're not going to admit it. Again, we'll do everything we can to hide that. Are you willing to consider that you may be wrong? These are some of the signs of humility, along with what we've said before, the ability to listen, ask questions, be slow to judgment, be able to suspend judgment. These are all actually signs that you are humble. Now, again, I think it's probably safe to assume, you can tell me otherwise in the Q&A to follow, there's probably agreement here, even just based upon body language and things like that being open-minded is good. It's healthy. Our society needs it. There's not really a danger in being open-minded, and it's very valuable for society. But there is something that being open-minded presupposes. And we need to consider the justification for being open-minded. So what does being open-minded presuppose? I'd put that this is at least one thing that it presupposes. It presupposes that truth is knowable and absolute in nature. I mean, if truth is relative, why bother worrying about new ideas or different ideas? If all ideas are just as valid as the one you currently possess, then being open-minded isn't of value. Because it doesn't matter what belief you hold or someone else holds, they're equally valid. But that's obnoxious and ridiculous, and relativism is a self-defeating proposition. Further, if truth is unknowable, and this is a question of epistemology, that even if truth exists, we lack the ability to discover it and understand it. Well, if truth is unknowable, well, then it's obvious why being open-minded is pointless. Be open-minded all day long. Nothing's ever going to fill it. You can't have any certainty that what comes in is true. So I think being open-minded has with it certain metaphysical presuppositions, if you will. And it presupposes that truth is knowable and it's absolute in nature. I think it also presupposes something else. It presupposes the existence of objective, moral truth. What kind of claim is the claim, you should be open-minded? What kind of claim is that? It's a moral claim. And here's where I want to bring us to. We're getting close to the end of this talk here. Again, and perhaps I'm wrong, I'll be glad for you to show me that I'm wrong in my assumption here. Because I think there's probably a lot of agreement up to this point, regardless of what political side of the aisle we're on, or whether we're an atheist or a Christian or something in between. I think most of us would get to a point where we would utter the statement, yes, you should be open-minded. But that is a moral claim. And so it presupposes, if you want me to adhere to it, it presupposes the existence of objective moral facts and values. Because if you were to say to me, you should be open-minded, and I responded, why? What would you say? You might list some of the reasons literally that I just mentioned of its value in society, right? And you might go through that. Well, it's just good. It's healthy for society. It allows for progress. It's just good. You should be open-minded. And I said, yeah, well, I don't care about any of that. And then you go back to me, well, you're just being so selfish. So? Well, don't you think that it will be better for you in the long run if you just go along with this because it's good for everyone else? And you can participate in a functioning society? And what if I said, the hell with that? You simple-minded people that are lacking in power, you can have your little social contract. I'm going to manipulate it for my own good. David Hume pointed this thing out long ago, the problem with things like social contracts or whatnot. It's what he called the sensible knave. Now, if God doesn't exist, this is kind of where this goes, right? If God doesn't exist, life is inherently meaningless. Now, those that argue from an atheism or naturalistic standpoint don't necessarily go on to a nihilistic position. They'll say, no, life is inherently meaningless, but this is a perfectly fine thing. We're all blank slates, and we can construct our meaning however we see fit. And then we can develop social contracts based upon what we think works best, and we can all agree to go along with it. Now, if God doesn't exist, I would grant that's the best we have, but it's entirely arbitrary. I mean, just because a group of people get together and say, this is what works best, that doesn't make it right. That's different, right? You understand the difference in that? I mean, you could conceive of an island where a bunch of pedophiles got together and decided what is best for us is that we are able to create human life through surrogate donors or whatnot, surrogate womb, and then brainwash these children from a very early age such that they don't know anything different. In fact, they desire what we're going to do. And this works best for us. Are we okay to just go, well, they constructed their meaning how they saw fit, and no one's getting hurt in the process, so I guess that's okay. No, we'd go, that's wrong. No matter what they think, that's wrong. It violates the standard and the sacredness of human dignity and worth. But where does that come from? The existence of objective moral facts are only accounted if there is a God. Theism is the best justification for the existence of objective moral facts and duties. Because if there is a God, there is a design, there is purpose, there's a way things are supposed to be. Which that's our whole concept of evil, isn't it? That is not the way things are supposed to be. That's what we call evil, right? But if that's not the way things are supposed to be, what we're saying is there's a way things are supposed to be. How can there be a way things are supposed to be if life is the result of a cosmic accident and human life are simply the result of chemical reactions and we're simply genetic mutants? So I think, and here's what I want to do. With respect, because I'm not able to give a full lecture on how theism best justifies the belief in objective moral facts. So in respect to those of you in here that wouldn't believe that, let me just ask you to consider how the value of being open-minded presupposes that there is an objective reality that is best accounted for if God exists. Will you consider that? Are you really open-minded? Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mike. So we have some time for questions. I don't know how much time. I think we've got at least 30 minutes or so. But so if anyone has a question, John has a mic, I have a mic. Just raise your hand. We will come to you. If you could, make it a question and not a statement or a sermonette. And we'll stay back. If there's a little back and forth, we'll allow for that. But if you could, keep it brief and make it a question, please. So I'll start back with Marty.
Hello, my name is Marty. Assuming the existence of the God of the Bible, is it possible that God could possibly harden the heart of a person, therefore blind his eyes, mute his ears, so that he or she would not be open-minded by the doings of that God of the Bible?
It's a great question. No, I do not think so. It sounds like you've read portions of the Bible where it says that, like for example, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. If you examine the passage, it talks about how Pharaoh's heart was hardened previously. And a hardening of a person's heart in a response to their own hardening could be in line with a God allowing someone to reap the natural consequences that come from the rebellion, more so than him directly causing the hardening of hearts. There is some theological debate on that. There will be some that take a hard line on that. I'm not one of them. And the hard line being they think that, yes, God hardened some people's hearts, and they lack the ability then to make certain decisions. I don't think that's possible. Actually, I don't think that's logically possible. That's the question that I have. Can God override the will of somebody such that they have no control over what to do? Can God compel belief? I don't know that that is possible any more than it's possible for God to make a one-ended stick. Compelled belief, I think, is a logical contradiction, and I don't think God even has the ability to perform things that are logically contradictory. But this is not a position that I hold very tightly. In the true spirit of tonight's lecture, I'm glad for a conversation on that to really explore that. And that's a really good question. It's in the deep end of the swimming pool, if you will. And I hope I answered your question satisfactorily. It sounded open-minded. That's really my only goal, is to prove myself not to be a hypocrite tonight. So, I'm kidding.
I just want to make a statement. Like when you said that about that.
You need a mic. I can't hear you.
I was going to say. But anyway. I wanted to emphasize when that poor kid you talked about, because we have involved in student ministries at my church, that just seriously broke my heart when that the kid looked at the person and said, how did the animals get all the animals fit on the ark? And I was like, huh? That just, like, I could, yeah.
Yeah, it's pervasive. Again, I was shocked at first how often I heard that response as to why I don't believe in God. It makes perfect sense, though. It really does. I mean, if I were continually told, don't ask that question, don't ask that question, don't ask that question, just have faith, and by faith, kind of a equivocation or a redefinition, I should say, of what faith is, turning it into blind, wishful hoping or whatever, I would certainly conclude that. And so I'll tell you, I love my parents. They're a great gift to me. And one of the greatest things they gave me and my brothers and sisters was an environment to ask these questions and argue them even in a loving and safe space. At no point did I feel threatened that my love and identity as a good person, if you will, was questioned by my questioning. And so they gave that space. And that's a great gift of the home. It's a great gift of the church. It's one of the roles the church should have in society, especially right now. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, I think there's a great opportunity for us to become that bastion of free thought and safe space to think about the most important issues in life. And so think about that. If you're a pastor, a youth minister, think about how you can cultivate that kind of environment in your local gatherings. That truth is knowable, it is to be pursued, and the best way it is to be pursued is in a safe environment where questions are welcome and answers are sought out.
How would you recommend actively creating that environment in church, as well as promoting leaders that also are looking into that? Or how do you fix a church that's also already closed-minded and has those, or closed-minded and already has leaders in place of that? Like, what's something participants can do, and what's also something the leadership can do?
Yeah, it was a little hard to hear it, so you tell me if I didn't get it right. What's the best way to begin cultivating that kind of environment that allows questions? I do think it's a top-down thing. Well, let me address it from a top-down standpoint. If you're a leader of an organization, you lead gatherings, one of the things you should routinely do is invite your audience to ask questions. So part of the value of Q&As in general isn't just the content that's delivered, but it's the message that's sent. Nothing's off limits. Ask a question. It also conveys strength to your position, though. That's one of the nice byproducts of it. But invite that. So that's one thing I do from the pulpit, is I routinely will say, especially in recognition if it's a topic that there's theological debate about, if it's a social issue that's controversial or personal, I will invite people to ask questions. I'll say, if you think I'm full of it, I want to know. Now, don't be a jerk when you come tell me, but let's have the conversation. And I've been real encouraged to see how that's happened in my church. Again, like I've told you, atheists routinely come. They say these things. We have people in our church that are politically divided. And it's not because we're wish-washy. It's like we're just not going to go there. No, we go there. But people feel that the goal isn't the maintaining of a political or ideology. It's the pursuit of truth. So from a top-down standpoint, one of the simple things leaders can do is in their gatherings, invite questions, whether it's in the service or afterwards. Say, come and talk to me. Even in your gatherings, and show the intellectual honesty, like even, pat myself on the back right here, like show where you have convictions and questions even in a public setting. There's a lot of, I get the fear that leaders have. Like, if I'm not viewed to be all-knowing, why are people ever going to listen to me? I know that fear. I've experienced that fear. Like, I can't admit I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong, that's going to be a weakness that's going to be exploited. I get that fear. But if you're a leader and you're making decisions out of fear, your time is going to run out pretty quick. So I argue it requires courage to invite questions and even to let your people know when you've been wrong, that you might be wrong, or whatever. So that's kind of a top-down thing. Bottom-up thing, if you're not a leader, how do you do this? Just pester them with questions in the most respectful way. Why do we do this? Are you sure about this? What's the harm? Just do that. Now, of course, you would need a relationship to do this in a right way. So seek out relationships with your leaders. build those relationships, find ways to serve them, because when they like you, they will listen to you. Talk to me some more. We can really get into the weeds of this, but that's at least a starting place.
Would you have a fairly short explanation why college campuses should be a place where free speech is celebrated, why it seems to be more and more opposed?
I did not hear that at all. I mean, I heard it, but I remember. And that's not your fault. It was just I had a hard time hearing it.
Am I okay now?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, would you have a fairly short explanation why college campuses that would seem to be places where free speech would be celebrated, why is it more and more opposed on college campuses today?
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know that I want to risk oversimplifying it or attributing bad, malicious, kind of motivation. I think I'd be happy just to affirm what you said. Colleges should be a place where dialogue is open and truth pursued. Universities ought not be a place, an ideology factory, that silences any viewpoint that disagrees with it. That is not the true spirit of the academy and scholarship. So as to why, we could speculate. There's probably a broad range of ideas that are likely to be true, but I'd rather not speculate. I think we could all just affirm this is what is needed, this is what is right, and it's what students desire, is a space where the disciplines come together to collaborate and pursue truth and understand the world that we live in.
Hey, my name is Nick Adams. My question is, how can we, or what tools can we use to teach, share, or explain without coming across as condemning or legalistic to someone who is closed-minded?
Ask questions. One of the best, most useful tools of the debater, apologist, whatever you want to call it, is just the ability to ask really good questions. Questions, when phrased the right way, they're disarming. I mean, you can say anything like, "You're going to wear that?" It can be, convey something. But questions are generally, they're disarming. They kind of bypass natural defenses. Moreover, what do questions do when you ask them to somebody? What do they make the person do? Think. Statements make people what? Defend. So a way to really open up someone's mind is by asking questions. We were mentioning Greg Kokel's book, Tactics, his book has been very influential for many people. His expression is, you end up leaving a pebble in somebody's shoe. And questions really do that more so than statements. Statements can do that, don't get me wrong, but questions often have a way to really just nag at somebody because it's open-ended. It invites thought. Statements cause a defense, and then boom, the conversation's over and done. I've said that, I can move on. A question is ongoing for somebody. It becomes like a pebble in someone's shoe, right? Where you eventually have to stop and look at what is there. Questions are just unbelievably powerful. If you don't mind, I'll tell a story about this real quick. But it was back in my high school days, and me and a buddy of mine went to a movie to see what was showing. It was before the internet existed, but it came with an annoying noise and took forever to load up. So we drove to the movie theater to see what was playing. So we're looking on the marquee board to see what was playing. And these two guys walked up to the car, and they were obviously intoxicated. And one guy gets right in my face and says, "What are you looking at?" Now, I was a 17-year-old boy, so I handled this the right way. I said, "What, you're in my face. What do you want, a kiss?" Yeah, there was a time in my life where, let's just say, I wouldn't be giving lectures like this. And he steps back, and with a slur in his voice, he goes, "Oh, no. This dude's a gay." He put the in front of it, not gay. He's a gay. He goes, "I'm going to punch this guy right in the face." And he turns to his buddy, who's like this 4'0" lackey, and he goes, "Count to 5. I'm going to punch him in the face." Like, yeah, man, you do it. You punch him in the face. I'm going to count to. So he literally starts counting. And now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get punched in the face just for running my mouth. I'm not going to fight at the movie theater. There's a cop right there. So here's my brilliant idea. Because I don't want to look like a punk. I'm going to slowly put my arm up and grab the armrest. That way, if the guy tries to take a shot at me, I can try to deflect it real cool or whatnot. I don't know why I didn't think just roll up the window. Heck, we're in a car. We could have driven off. But here I am just waiting to get punched in the face by a drunk guy. And this little 4'0" lackey guy's counting. My friend from the back seat, in his Californian accent, though the guy grew up in South Georgia, he goes, "Dude, why are you so angry?" And the guy goes, "I don't know." Literally froze the guy in his tracks. And my friend from the back seat pulls out a gospel tract, and okay, yes, Cameron, you're the real Christian. But it's like one of the first experiences in my life of like the power of a question. It just stops people in their tracks, causes them to think. It opens up their mind. So learn how to ask really good questions. And again, it's a habit, it's a practice. You'll get better at it. Read Tactics by Greg Koukl. Get your 4 or 5 go-tos that you'll then learn how to build a bigger repertoire. I got another really fun story about the power of a question when I was speaking in London one time. I'll tell you about it afterwards if you want. I'm an old man. I could tell stories all day. Actually, that's the lecture I want to give. It's just where I get up here with a pipe and tell stories. But we'll do that. We'll do that out there maybe. But yeah, ask questions.
I could be wrong, period.
Period.
Do you think there are people out there who are so close-minded they might be a lost cause, like they'll just never change their minds?
Probably. Next question. Probably. You won't know it until you find out, so I would never just write somebody off. Though there is kind of the principle, again, just Jesus is brilliant, this principle of when you encounter somebody who is objectively now, you know that they're closed-minded, you can move on. It's part of Jesus' teaching, don't cast pearls before swine lest they trample them and come and turn and attack you. That's part of that idea. So if you do find somebody that is just, I've said this many times, like, hey, it doesn't seem like you're really willing to listen. I'd love to have this conversation. But if you've already decided and you're not willing to listen to me, then we really don't need to talk. But let me know when you are and just move on. So, yeah.
You have talked of people using the Bible and misunderstanding some of the scripture, and I mentioned an example you just put right there. And people can use the Bible as a shield against a lot of newer discoveries in any sort of scientific field. But do you think that what do you think the best way to use the Bible as a learning tool? And rather than like as a this is law, almost like how can I use this to better myself rather than shun someone else?
If I understood your question, how can you use the Bible to grow personally rather than as something to change other people's minds? Or maybe I misunderstood your question. Is that it or what?
Yeah, that's relatively it, yeah.
Yeah. So one, I don't think it's an either or. I think the teachings of Jesus are incredibly brilliant and persuasive. I think the Apostle Paul is a first-rate philosopher, and his arguments are very compelling. So I don't think that you need to shun away from that. But your question is still a good question. How can I just learn from it? One is just read it. Such a silly answer, but people don't read their Bible anymore. They just don't. The state of biblical knowledge is ridiculous. I don't have statistics currently in front of me, so I may misquote these, but the percent of people that have what would be considered a biblical worldview is so low. When they do these pollings on how many people can name the 4 Gospels, it's so ridiculously low. The statistics of how many people think that Sodom and Gomorrah were husband and wife are ridiculously high. Some people think Joan of Arc was married to Noah. So it's like the Bible is the most criticized book and least read book, perhaps, that there is today. So my encouragement to all of you is read the Bible. It's a treasure. It's brilliant. There's certainly parts of it that you won't understand. It's an ancient document, so there's cultural elements that you don't understand. There's theological elements that you don't understand, especially as it pertains to the nation of Israel. People just pick up like the book of Leviticus and go, boom, I'm an expert in Hebraic law and the nation of Israel, and then just condemn it based on without any kind of understanding. So I'm getting a little quick in my speech here. Read it, but read it with humility too. Asking questions, what don't I know here? And then go get answers to that. There's so much, a world of resources today, I mean, in terms of historical context, this, that, and the other. But yeah, just start reading it. So much of the Bible you can't understand. And then read it with the intellectual humility of when you don't understand something, write it down and go seek an answer to that. But yeah, that's great. I love the question. How can I grow? I think that is step one, right? If you desire to be influential and engaging in the world of ideas, you need to start with yourself. Your knowledge, your character, then go. One of the best pieces of advice, I know this wasn't the question you asked, and it wasn't even given directly. I know Bobby Conway, but I just heard him give this in a lecture. Bobby Conway's an apologist, an author, pastor. I don't think he's pastoring right now, but that's not the point. He said, let your character be bigger than your platform. I thought that was brilliant. You know, so many leaders, myself included, are inclined to think about the platform, the ministry, the career. How can I grow that? But how many times do we see all these famous people, one after another, just dropping like flies because of one failure after the next? Now, that's the backwards way to do it, especially if you believe in a God who is sovereign. You focus on your character, your holiness, you pursue knowledge, you focus on that. Let that be bigger than your platform. Maybe one or two more. It's getting serious. If you ask the last question, it better be a really good one.
If I am selfishly pursuing all my desires, how can I be open-minded? And on the other side, if I'm talking to someone like that, how can I get them to ever become open-minded?
So if I'm selfishly pursuing my own desires, how can I be open-minded? Is that the question? And then how could you help that person? Is that the question? So I'm just work my head through that. Work my head through that. Didn't make any sense. If I'm selfishly pursuing my desires, well, I don't know that precludes you from being open-minded, because it's entirely possible that you'd be open-minded to how you could continue to fulfill your selfish desires. So I don't know that it follows that if you are selfishly pursuing things, you are closed-minded. Selfishly pursuing things is problem one in and of itself. That, again, though, if God doesn't exist, that go right ahead. So, but if God does exist, selfishly pursuing things is problem number one. We would deal with that. And how would you make that aware to somebody? I don't know that there's just a singular answer that does that. Again, life is complex. Why somebody is acting in a selfish way, why are they only considering their own agenda, not other people? That reason probably differs from one person to the next. One of the best things that I've learned in ministry or pastoral ministry, again, is to not come with out-of-the-box responses to people. People are complicated. So I'll typically ask questions, get them to tell their story. Motivations are really hard because often you don't even know why you do what you do. You could be doing something for a number of reasons, two of which you don't even are aware of. And so how do you help somebody that is selfishly pursuing things is a bit of a case by case. From a methodological standpoint, I would pursue it by building a relationship and asking questions to help them out of that.
Are you a Christian?
Why am I a Christian? I love that question. It's not a short one. I'll give you the medium answer. The beginning of it was I was raised in a Christian home. I had parents that loved me. I had parents that took me to church. I had parents that taught me the Bible, and I saw them really live it out. Like there was never a bit of this is fake to them. Like they really believed this stuff. Excuse me. And so from a very young age, I was taught that this is the way the world was. A lot of people in that position, right? From different religions. I would say early on I did have an experience too that should not be discounted. Part of Christian teaching, if it is correct, assuming God is correct and the Bible is reliable, those are all arguments that I won't make in this answer. I believe this response. I believe those things to be true, though. But a part of Christian teaching is that upon responding in faith to the call of the Lord, you are given His Holy Spirit. And one of the things that the Holy Spirit does is it gives you the assurance that you belong to God. So not only does it validate the existence of God in an experiential way, it also validates your relationship to Him. It's what philosophers would call something like, William Lane Craig, for example, refers to it as the self-authenticating witness of the Holy Spirit. Alvin Plantinga has also written on this. He's developed a very complex argument on how knowledge of God is actually a first principle, but we won't get into that. So that's part of it for me too, is I would say that I experienced the reality of God's existence because His Spirit in me. Now, how do I know that I'm just not deceived in that, right? That this experience wasn't that? How do I know that my parents, though well-intentioned, were just wrong? Could that be the case? I've looked into it. And it's not because I had necessarily a moment of doubt. What drives me, though, is I have a passion to know what is true because things that are true help people. There's a lot of claims being given in this world with the promise of this will make your life better. Not all of them are equal. So I have this drive, this sense of justice that motivates me to know what is true and what is not, because things that are true help people. So that's part of the apologetics for me in the studying it. If you're not familiar with the word apologetics, it's kind of a bad choice of, what was done was you took a Greek word apologia and you translated it into English so it sounds like you're apologizing for something. So it's kind of but what it means is to be able to give a defense or a reason for your belief. So I looked into it and I examined it. And so why am I a Christian today? I was taught it, I saw it lived out, I experienced it, and I'm convinced that it is true based upon reasoning, good argumentation, and evidence.
Yeah, so one of my questions is there ever a point you stop asking questions biblical-wise?
No.
Like, the only thing I say this is because I was having a conversation with a friend a while back, and he said we shouldn't ask too many questions because if you fully understand, let's say we got all the answers for the Bible and God, then God wouldn't be as great if we fully understood Him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but okay, even in that, if you rightly grant this position that God is unknowable, you could never exhaust your knowledge of Him then, right? Because that kind of presupposes you get to a point where you know enough, and trying to know more is to make God smaller. That kind of presupposes that you're getting close to the knowledge of God. But God is infinitely wise and powerful. You spend your whole life and you wouldn't exhaust it. So I don't think so. Now, I probably answered that too quickly. And when I said no, I think a disposition of asking questions, you should always have that. Is there a literal time when you should just stop asking a question and make a decision or have an element of trust? Yes. Because sometimes we use questions as an excuse to not act. And that's just cowardly. And so sometimes, so let me qualify my statement again. So thank you for continuing on because it gave me the chance to do this. From a general standpoint, no, you should never reach the point where you feel like I've asked all the questions and I don't need to ask any more. In a situational case, yes, you can start using questions as an excuse not to act. Like, well, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do because this question wasn't answered, and it becomes a crutch. So if that answer is helpful in that qualified sense, that's probably the more full way that I would answer it. This might be the last one. 5 minutes left.
Well, with the university kind of monitoring free speech and making that more difficult, what would you say are some good practical ways for students to fight against that?
Yeah. Well, starting from a position of in the classroom, be the best student. Often when we feel like we are being oppressed, we use that as an excuse to be just jerks. So I think that developing a reputation of having good character, good knowledge is part of it. Because, you know, when I said let's not get into speculating, one thing is true. Those that oppress viewpoints think that people that hold those viewpoints are idiots, that there's something immoral about them. So work against that. But then I would say just don't be silent. Don't be silent. You know, like Ratio Christi as an organization should be commended for taking this battle to court. When they experience the repression of free speech on college campuses, they don't just roll over. They fight it appropriately in legal channels, which Christians should do. There's nothing unbiblical about working within a just governmental system for the common good. And lawsuits in that sense to fight back against the repression of free speech are good. They're moral. Christians should be doing it. And Ratio Christi as an organization in its history, it's one of the best things that they have done. So 2 ways on how to do this. One is focus on the kinds of people that you are. Be known for people to have good character and are intelligent. And then just don't be silent. Work the proper channels, such as a lawsuit, to fight back against it. One more, or is that a good place to end? All right. Oh, you got it. This better be good. So I was about to say thank you, and I didn't. I stopped. So this question had a lot of pressure on you.
This is more a political and theological issue combined. What is your opinion on the state of Israel and the new covenant with Christianity?
Yeah, we should have ended on the last question. That's a good question. I'm not the guy to ask that. Seriously, great question. Maybe we can talk afterwards, but it's a great question. I need to ask some follow-up questions to you. But yeah, so there you go. All right, thank you guys.
All right, so guys, thank you for coming. My name is Tom Jassy. I'm the chapter director for Ratio Christi, and like Mike said, this is really what we do. We're a Christian organization. We're an apologetics organization, which means we present evidence, we discuss evidence for why we believe Christianity is true, but we welcome people of different beliefs, different faiths to come and have these conversations in a rational way, and then if we don't agree, we can still shake hands and go out and have coffee afterwards. We've already had, this is basically our last meeting on campus for the semester. Beginning January 13th, I think is the first Monday, we will again begin meeting on Monday nights at 7 o'clock up in the Azalea room, so you're welcome to come to that. On your way out, you will be handed a flyer for an apologetics conference that we have annually. It's going to be in March. It's going to be at Grace Baptist Church. Dr. Michael Brown is going to be the keynote speaker there, as well as having 13 or 14 local, semi-local apologists who are going to have breakout sessions. And so if you enjoy controversial topics, if you have questions about Christianity, we cover a lot of the common objections to why is Christianity true if ... So it'd be a great opportunity for you to come and to find out more. If you want to find out more about Ratio Christi, there's a table out in the lobby as you go out if you want to find out how you can get involved, or maybe maybe you're not even still sure what we do with Ratio Christi. Stop by there. Also, there's a table for the Colson Center out there as well. I encourage you to stop by there as well. Again, that's an organization that is based around a Christian worldview. But both those tables are out there in the lobby. Again, Mike, thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for coming, and have a happy Thanksgiving.